Hello everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the Cardano Hotel podcast. Today we have a very unique guest checking into the show, none other than Charles Hoskinson. For those of you who are new to Cardano, Charles is the founder of Cardano and CEO of software company Input Output Global. And Charles also has a very long track record in blockchain before Cardano, and he was involved in the creation of projects like BitShares, Ethereum, and Ethereum Classic, just to name a few. Hello, Charles. Thank you very much for accepting the invite, and I hope you enjoyed your holidays.
Thank you so much for having me on, Alfred. And looking forward to a great new year.
Thank you. Yeah, all of us. There's been tremendous growth in interest in Cardano in 2022, but so many new people are coming into the ecosystem. So for those viewers that do not yet know Cardano, can you please give a short summary of what Cardano is and what it attempts to accomplish?
Yeah, so Cardano is what we like to call a financial operating system. And, what the heck is that? And what's the point of that? And so right now we live in a time of tremendous change. And this change was brought on in the 1970s on from the creation of the internet. And so society was kind of structured around this idea that information is expensive to aggregate and move. And so everything was built this way. You kind of built your palaces in certain places, you built your libraries in certain places, banks stored your money. And closer you were to repositories of information or repositories of value, the more prominent you could be. Okay, so that's why cities existed. The internet came out and it said, okay, now the cost to store, move, access information instantaneously anywhere in the world is basically zero. You can move anything you want. So you can send a book, a video, any of these things. So people in the 1990s and on started asking, well, what does this mean for the financial system? What does this mean for identity? What does this mean for value? So we saw the creation of all kinds of digital currencies like DigiCash, and we saw a digital identity standards form and so forth. And then eventually in 2009, Bitcoin came out and it said, hey, not only can we digitize everything, but we can actually decentralize it. So we no longer need the palaces and the cities and the temples. We don't need central actors to run anything. We can basically be our own banks. We can be our own identity provider. We can be our own marketplace. And we can use the same type of protocols and governance structures that govern the internet, where no one's in control and it's totally decentralized, to control these facets. So what Cardano really is the logical extreme of this idea, where we say, hey, it's not good enough just to quantify value and store it. We'd like a generic framework that you can use to basically run an economy. So let's say that you're like Ethiopia, and they're modernizing right now. They have 107 million people, and they're going from a paper-based economy, an analog economy, to a digital one. And so while they do that, they have to ask, well, how should property rights work? If you own land, how should we represent that? We don't have a stock market. We're just about to create one. So what should the security of the 21st century, the stock of the 21st century look like? And how does an exchange that trades that look like? Well, our hope is to kind of build a Swiss Army knife for all these capabilities. And so basically what we can do is go into a country and we can allow them to build things in a very different way than they came before. And what way is that? Well, decentralized. Mm-hmm. We don't like central actors, middlemen of necessity. We don't like gatekeepers. We'd like you to basically be in control of your financial life, and we'd like you to have your own economic identity that is intrinsically global, it's censorship resistant, and it's portable. So you take it with you. So when you leave Ethiopia, let's say they have this new mecca of identity. You leave Ethiopia, go to Europe, you go to America, you go to China. It works just as well in those economies as it does at home. And you're never without the essential things you need to be a global citizen in that respect. So that's kind of why we started it. And we're deeply inspired from lessons learned in the 80s and 90s and what the cryptocurrency industries taught us. And we took a very first principles approach. And so instead of saying, hey, we know how to do all of this, we involved the academy. We wrote 91 scientific papers. We went through the peer review process in many of them, and we wrote over 1 million lines of code. And we spent now almost 6 years working tirelessly, basically slowly but surely constructing the foundations of this idea. And we've gotten it to a point where we now have an ecosystem of hundreds of thousands of people, and we're chasing deals for millions of people, and we're getting rapid growth. And the network is now being operated by the community instead of a static and federated set of actors. So it's been probably the wildest 6 years of my life. I've been to 52 countries, and it's been great. We've met so many people, and we've really accomplished a lot of great things along the way.
But actually, you grew up in Hawaii. Did you spend your entire childhood there?
I lived there till I was about 9, and then I moved to Colorado. But I went back, and I still have a lot of family there. My uncle lives there, and my grandfather died there. So it's a great place.
The reason I'm asking is because what always filters from all your interviews is that you're not in it for the money, clearly, but you're engaged in building Cardano because you have a very strong sense of social justice. So, do you think you were born that way, or did you perhaps live through certain experiences in your life as a child in Hawaii that make you reflect on human nature, and that it's like a life lesson?
Yeah, I guess I just have an innate sense of reciprocity and fairness. If something is good for me, it should be good for you. And if I enjoy a good system, you should enjoy a good system. And if that's not the case, then there's something wrong with society. A long time ago, I read, and I can't remember what philosopher it was, but they mentioned something called the birth test. And so the universal measuring stick of fairness in society is this idea that you're born into a society. Now, you don't know which one, and you don't know your circumstances. So you could be male, female, gay, straight, disability, no disability, high intelligence, low intelligence, impoverished, wealthy. You don't know your circumstances. So in a view, a society is comparatively more fair and equitable if you're more likely to take that bet. So I probably, for example, would take the birth test in the United States or Germany. These are developed economies. Probably wouldn't do that in Senegal or Indonesia because the odds are that you would be born in a very bad circumstance and not enjoy equal rights with others. So the point is that if we have the ability to build systems to make the world overall a better place for everyone, that's a good life. Go spend your life that way. And the miracle of capitalism, the miracle of markets is that you can do that in a way and also live comfortably. I don't like charities, and I don't like not-for-profits in one dimension. I admire the work that people do, but I don't like the fact that they lack sustainability. You always need somebody to show up and give them something to keep them going, to keep them strong. And the reality is that if you're only living on the beneficence of a benefactor, then first, the benefactor has a lot of control over what you do. And then second, what happens if they go away? Then the entire mission collapses. So the miracle of markets is that if you can find a sustainable way, a profitable way that also creates good for people, I think that's the highest art in the highest form. Because not only can you do it, other people will do it too, because they're chasing profit, not necessarily, some sense of emotional fulfillment or these other things. And I think we found a great niche here with the creation of Cardano and the cryptocurrency industry as a whole. It really is making the world a better place, and it's teaching people to look at money differently. And we're forcing innovation on a very ossified, unfair market that disenfranchises billions of people. And before I die, I think we're going to live in one global market that's much more fair than the one I was born into as a direct consequence.
Yeah, while you're saying that, a song comes to mind. I don't know if you can remember it, by Nene Cherry, which is called 7 Seconds. And it's that about the first 7 seconds of your life that you're not aware of the color of your skin. I think that's always a very good song to listen to. So regarding in this whole in this whole model, did you have a role model in your family or in your public life, or was it somebody that you aspired to grow up to be when you were young?
I have a lot of role models that I've looked to. Like, for example, I really admired Bertrand Russell. He was a guy who kind of lived his passions and to the most logical extremes. And, he was born in kind of a stuffy English society and mid-level, low-level aristocracy. And his whole life, he was expected to be somebody and do something. And he was quite the contrarian in that respect. For example, he was a pacifist and very anti-war. He was an anti-nuclear weapons person, but he was a brilliant logician. And so single thing he did, he built these colossally tight, beautiful arguments for why he was doing what he did. But then, of course, he had some contradictions along the way, especially with infidelity. So he was a very interesting guy. And from him, I learned that, it's okay to have contrarian beliefs, but you have to be able to justify them. you have to be able to build some form of consistent framework and also check yourself for your own biases. So that's great. I really like Albert Camus as well. There's this concept of the absurdity of life and finding joy in the absurdity and the insanity of all things. And he has a very famous story of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus rolls the boulder up a hill and then kind of rolls down. And the Greeks intended this to be some sort of ultimate punishment for deceiving the gods. But Camus actually looked at it as actually a paradise because Sisyphus had absolute clarity of purpose, which is a bizarre philosophy. But the more you think about it, it's actually, there's some great parallels to Japanese thought with concepts like ikigai and kodawari. That concept of the relentless pursuit of perfection and the way of life. So you think about the sushi chef who shows up, works the same job every single day.
I remember you mentioning that one.
Yeah, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. So these are all things that, I've kind of collected along the way. And it inspired me to not have fear in being an entrepreneur and not have fear in having thoughts that aren't quite mainstream. And not taking offense to other people's ideas, even if they're radically divergent and different from my own. For example, I loathe communism. I think it's one of the most evil of philosophies around, but actually I have a few communists who work for me. So even though I loathe certain ideologies, I always find a way to, get along with people where and when it's possible. Yeah. And so, I've had a lot of inspirations there. My dad also inspired me a lot. He became a doctor and he's been a physician now for almost 40 years. And he retired, went back into medicine because he loves it so much. And he's a man of tremendous character and discipline. And he's worked very, very hard throughout his whole life to do the things that not only he felt were right, but also make it work for everybody, even if it meant tremendous personal sacrifice for himself. So he deeply inspired me. My grandfather also inspired me a lot too. He was kind of the ultimate self-made man on my dad's side. He grew up real poor in Montana. They were all ranchers and farmers and forest people. And he said, hey, I want to be a doctor. And they're like, well, we're poor ranchers in Montana. It doesn't work that way. And he said, well, no, I'll figure it out. So he became a smoke jumper, which is like a special type of firefighter that jumps out of airplanes with dynamite and blast fire lines. And he saved all his money, married his high school sweetheart. And he made enough from that to be able to go to medical school. And he became an OBGYN and delivered 4,000 kids over his career, including me. But he was a bit of an adventurer. He's always getting himself in near-death experiences like scuba diving and jumping out of planes and sailing and doing things that were quite questionable. Yeah, so that taught you to live life in the extremes. And I kind of adopted that too. Love skydiving and, all these other crazy things. And I'm not allowed to have a motorcycle anymore, but I had one for a while.
The insurance company won't pay for it, I guess.
Yeah, the family hates it.
The family hates it, right? So we know that you got into cryptocurrencies because of Bitcoin originally, and that consequently you were parts of other projects like BitShares, etc. And then at some point, Ethereum came on the scene. The story goes that you find yourself secluded in a beach house in Miami for a certain period of time with a group of people to brainstorm about creating Ethereum. It sounds a bit like an episode of Big Brother. So who would come up with the name Ethereum, and how did you guys all end up in Miami Beach House, and what was it like to hang out with all these big minds of the blockchain industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time, none of us were kind of big guys, and so we didn't have any egos. Egos came later. That's the problem with success.
You were 26, right, at the time?
Yeah, exactly. And Vitalik was like 19 or something like that. It's like no one had any egos back then. Maybe Gavin did, but he had a PhD in computer science, and he thinks very highly of himself. But for the most part, we were just a bunch of guys that showed up, and we said, hey, we have this interesting open source project, and we were thinking, hey, maybe we can raise a few $1 million, and maybe it'll be in the top 10 in cryptocurrencies, and we'll be able to finally write some smart contracts. Yeah, right. The reason why Ethereum exists, it was a project of frustration. Vitalik and others had worked on color coins and Mastercoin. I'd worked on BitShares. And the whole reason we did these overlay protocols or alternative cryptocurrencies is because Bitcoin couldn't do these things. And we wanted to issue assets and do DNS and do identity and all kinds of stuff. And, if you have to spend millions of dollars in 6 months to build a framework just to issue a token as an overlay protocol, and it's a really bad experience, there's something intrinsically wrong with the system. So Vitalik wrote an interesting paper. It went through a series of iterations. Gavin is the guy who figured out how to actually build it in a proper way that actually would work. And he did some great work there. As for the name, that came from Vitalik, and I believe he poached it from something in World of Warcraft. There was an Ethereum with an I, and there's something there. And he was a big WoW player as a kid, and that kind of stuck with him. So games really do have an impact in that respect. And it shows you what happens. Big things usually have little beginnings, and
Yes.
so it wasn't an intention to be great or big. It was just, hey, let's go do something interesting and cool, and maybe it'll create a lot of value for some people. And it kind of snowballed and grew exponentially, and it became this colossal project. The great irony is, I spent only 6 months there, and it's, so far the biggest project I'd worked on, but it wasn't at the time. And I've been at Cardano for like 6 times longer, and we've done significantly more work, in my view, than anything we ever did with Ethereum. But you always get judged by the biggest successes or failures, regardless of what's more personally meaningful to me. It's the same thing that happened with Conway, the famous mathematician. So everybody knows him for Conway's Game of Life. But he was most proud of things like surreal numbers and his work on the monster group and these other things, but very few people know about that. But it's like that was a big, big part of his academic and professional career. Conway's Game of Life is a very small sliver, but anytime you mention Conway, they're like, oh yeah, Game of Life. That's what it is. And I think I might get Conway, where Ethereum is forever there, even if I go off and do 100 different projects and interesting things of greater note and scale.
But I mean, notice how I did introduce you as the CEO of Cardano. So
yeah, it doesn't have a CEO. It's an open protocol, and that's a good thing.
Right.
It's nice we have such a decentralized leadership structure.
Anyway, after because I'm so sort of going through the years, ever since you started. So then after you left Ethereum, you decided to go to Japan. So what made you decide to go there? Was it like a spiritual retreat, or did you go there with the idea to start a company, or how did that come about?
Well, what happened was that I was kind of bitter because I was an 0-2. I tried to do 2 different companies, BitShares and Ethereum. They didn't quite work out the way that I hoped. And I was like, man, I'm really bad entrepreneur. I'm bad at this whole thing. I should just go be a mathematician again, like shut myself up from society and become a bitter communist or something. I don't know, do the Bernie Sanders. But
why Japan?
But my co-founder of IOHK, he lived in Japan, and he had some guys come up to him and say, hey, we really like what you guys did with Ethereum, and we'd like to do an Ethereum of Japan. Can you get Charles to come out to Japan? And at the time, we were just chatting because he used to work with me when I was at Ethereum, and we went our separate ways after I left Ethereum and he left Ethereum, but we kept in contact. And so he bought me a plane ticket out to Japan, and I was still kind of bitter. And I said, I'll go, and I'll just go talk to these random Japanese guys and see what they want. And there's a lot of them. Then a lot of them, they were trading Ripple and Bitcoin, and they bought some Ether and these other things. And I said, well, if you actually want to do a cryptocurrency, we certainly can. I still have the original roadmap of what I wanted to do when I was the CEO of the Ethereum group. And they said, that sounds great. And so we kind of talked for a few months about the structure of power and how we would do a raise and what we'd need to do to make that happen. And then they formed some companies, and I formalized my company, and we became the development and protocol and science arm. And we got a contract over a 5-year period to go build Cardano. And eventually that group of Japanese people became Emergo, and they became kind of the commercialization arm of everything. And then we recognized we needed a kind of a governance body. And so we created the Cardano Foundation for that. And we're the Emergo and IOHK donated all the money to get the foundation up and running. And then its job was supposed to be like kind of the community manager and the acceptance criteria arm and the standards body and these things.
So in a sense, Emergo came before IOG.
Yeah, in a certain sense. And we were both kind of started roughly the same time. We were kind of the 2 founding entities of Cardano. But I mean, the discussions predated even the existence of those, because we were talking about it since early 2015, and the Cardano crowd scale began in late 2015. And at that point, IOG and Emergo were already running. And there was a special firm that actually did that called Attain. and they aggregated all the funds, and then we got a contract and started chipping away. So all of 2016 was just science. We had to actually build from nothing, like a whole scientific team and an engineering team, and learn how to do that.
Exactly.
Meantime, we were trying to figure out organizational design, like how do we build a foundation and do all of that stuff. And we made so many mistakes along the way. It's amazing we're still alive and here. I think it was just dogged resilience to somehow survive this long and get to a point where we actually know what we're doing. But we've gotten over that hump, and now like everything is comparatively easy to those early days.
And then so there was 2016, and then in 2017, December 2017, I think you got word that a certain hotel in Barcelona had decided to accept ADA for payment. What impacts did that news have on you?
Well, you know, it was really exciting because you never forget the first business to actually accept your cryptocurrency as currency. And so, for example, like there's this famous story in Bitcoin with the pizza story, where, you know, this pizza delivery guy comes and the guy says, "I'll give you Bitcoin for it." And I think he gave him like 10,000
What the hell is that? Yeah.
Like that. The world's most expensive pizza. In fact, there was even a book, $1 Million Pizza, and that was written back when Bitcoin was $100.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So no one kept that. So you never forget your first story in that respect. And it was really a great validating moment for me, because it said, oh, okay, this is certainly not going to be the last. And there are going to be eventually thousands and then tens of thousands of businesses that accept ADA. And then we're also going to see ADA used in many different contexts. And so it was a very significant moment. It's insignificant in the grand scheme of things, right? It's just one thing. But from a philosophical and from a kind of a moral viewpoint, a spiritual viewpoint, it really felt special, and it was a good moment.
So then we move on, and then we go to 2018, and at some point you come to the conclusion that it wasn't really working out as well as you would hope to. So you decided to basically to throw away the code base and start all over again.
So let's talk about that.
To make that decision.
That was probably the most difficult year of the entire project. So here's what happened. In 2016, we started doing all the science. We went to Corfu, Greece, and we hired Egelos Kiasis, and we started building all these scientific things. And we built a really good research group. So that's never regressed. We've always moved in a positive direction there. It's why we have 91 papers, and we're the most cited academic group around. You know, I'd studied mathematics, and so I had a pretty good idea of what a science group needed to look like and how to work with the universities. But, you know, I'm not an engineer by training. You know, I know how to code and I can read code, but software engineering is a discipline unto itself. And so I kind of had to figure out, like, what are we going to do there? And what I did is I said, well, let's take a two-prong approach. So let's get elite special forces group of guys who are really smart, and they're going to specialize in translating the science into formal specifications. And we're going to call that the slow track. And basically, that's the job of what we'd like Cardano to be before the end of 2020. Then let's bring in an agile group of young kids who are really passionate and excited, who move very quickly, and let's build some form of a cryptocurrency so we can get that out into market, get liquidity, and basically use that as a foundation to build on. And then the idea is at some point these two paths would converge, and we would be able to adopt all these new great high assurance ideas, but people wouldn't have to wait 5 years for us to build those things, right? So that was in my mind. It like made total perfect sense. So the elite special forces were led by Duncan Coutts, and he came from a firm called Volatile. He got a PhD from Oxford in computer science, and he's just a really good engineer. He's a really good science mind, and very talented, very experienced. And he created Cloud Haskell and all these other things. And the fast-moving agile team was led by Arseny Soroka, who created a firm called Sarakel. Now, I liked the Sarakel guys. They were fun to hang out with. If you took them to a bar, they'd outdrink everybody, you know, and they certainly had a great personality, very Russian, and they're based in St. Petersburg. The problem was that they were just maybe 1 or 2 years too immature to take on a project of as significant and as at scale as Cardano. So we got doubly screwed. We launched in September of 2017 with a code base that we knew was suboptimal, but we didn't fully appreciate how much technical debt and design problems that had. And what ended up happening is it caused huge regressions. So we had this roadmap where we were like, Shelley is going to ship in 2018. Smart contracts are going to come in 2019, and we had everybody lined up for it. And we had this slow moving team that was going to come, and then we'll polish it all off and we'll have beautiful. And all 2020 is like our overflow year. We're going to get anything we didn't get done in 2019 done there. The slow team had to be pulled over into the fast team to actually try to correct and clean up things, and things that would ordinarily take days ended up taking weeks or months. We had to redo documentation, we had to redo everything. And it got so bad that in September of 2018, I wrote this memo to my companies saying, maybe we should throw away the entire code base and maybe do something in Rust or Scala, or completely rewrite the Haskell code. And we eventually, after a lot of internal discussions, decided to actually rewrite all the Haskell code. And then we decided to build a Rust version of Cardano as well, based on what we'd learned from Icarus. But all 2018 was just a mess. It was probably the worst year for me professionally and for the project in terms of our progress, where everything we thought was going to happen, it didn't happen. And we had to figure out a way out of it. And, it was just one missed deadline after another missed deadline. And then eventually we had to let Sarah Kell go. And eventually we had to rebuild the entire product and engineering team. And the problem is that you have an expectation of getting everything done in original timeframes, right? But you're now 2 years behind, right? Because we started working in late 2016, early 2017, and all of that effort throughout all of 2017 had to basically be undone. But then there's this expectation of get everything done. And by the way, you're working with academics, and you're working with formal methods, and you're working with a very academic programming language, Haskell, which it doesn't allow you just to rapidly write code and hack things up and
time and preparation.
Get it out there. So it was very, very painful. And 2019 was very painful in that respect too, because we kept expecting to be able to finally ship something. And for example, at the Cardano Summit in April of 2019, I honestly believed we were going to have a good shot at launching Shelley. I believe that as late as December of 2018. I thought, oh, for sure, we'll be able to get what we needed out here. And it just didn't work out that way. We had colossal issues that came up, and we kept pushing and we kept pushing. But, the fact that we had two code bases helped tremendously, because that Rust code base allowed us to beta test the things that we desperately needed to. We created the incentivized testnet for it. We built Yoroi with that, with Emergo. And so it paid huge dividends in that respect. If I have any regret, what I should have done is I shouldn't have bet the farm in 2017 on Sarakel, and we should have built a Scala version of Cardano at the same time as a Haskell version. We had the people and the knowledge to do that because we'd been doing that with Ethereum Classic. And what would have happened is we would have actually launched Shelley probably in late 2018 had we had that, because the PROS protocol was available since 2017. We probably could have gotten that done. On the other hand, by being a little later to market, we had a much better game theoretic model. We obviously did the incentivized testnet. We learned a huge amount from that. And ultimately, I think the product is better today, and we learned a lot more by shipping the product today. I probably would have started also the Yella project a lot earlier. Had we had an extra year and it was unbroken, semantic-based compilation would be a reality probably, or close to reality now. K would be a lot more mature and would be a bit further along there, and we'd have smart contracts. But, it's woulda, coulda, shoulda. We should have launched Yoroi before we launched Daedalus. There's 1,000 little things there, but this is what you learn along the way. And, it's high stakes stuff, and it's not about making the right decisions, it's about surviving the totality of all decisions made, regardless if they're right or wrong. And I think the ecosystem is a very strong place right now. And, we have a very strong team, and we're probably the most competitive of all the third generation cryptocurrencies entering into 2021.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, because when I was sort of thinking back about, your development all through the years, and then you're dealing with a completely new technology. You're starting out with a company that's consists of 2 people, and now you're employing maybe more than 250. So if the tech doesn't exist, how do you even know who to employ?
Yeah, and also you have to build those skill sets, and then you think they'll only take a little bit of time, and it turns out they take a lot more time. And You overemphasize certain things like safety and correctness, because if you get it wrong, there's financial damage. And there's so much hindsight along the way. It's easy to look back and say, oh, here are all the 12, 15 things I could have done. But, looking forward, you're only as good as the information you're getting. And when your product and project team say something is going to take 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks go by and it takes another 2 weeks, and 2 weeks go by, it takes another 2, and then you're 3 months into it, you're like, oh God, this is not right. So you have all the egg on your face, and, then you have this community who's just like, God, what do we do? So it's definitely been a learning experience. But we're not in a situation where we have agile sprints. We ship something every 2 weeks. We have burned down charts with story points, all these things, and stuff happens roughly when we think it's going to happen. Like we said, Shelly's going to ship in this window, and it did. Goguen's on schedule. We just did the first hard fork for it, the Allegra hard fork, and the next one's coming in February, and then we'll knock out the last Goguen fork in Q2, and there you go. And so, like, the things we think are happening, even though the things we're doing are more complicated than the things that we were doing in 2018, 2019. The other thing I didn't anticipate was just how poor Haskell was as a mainstream engineering language. I thought that Haskell had evolved to a point that it would be practical for mainstream applications, but that was not the case. We had to rewrite network libraries. We had to rewrite tons of stuff to make it work well on Windows. We're still now working on development work for Haskell to WebAssembly and Haskell to JavaScript and these things. And we've literally put millions of dollars of engineering effort over the last 3 years into improving the programming language as a whole. And what really blows my mind about that whole experience is that normally when you show up into a community, an open source community, you invest millions of dollars into making those tools better for everyone because you release all of them open source. People are like, wow, these guys are great. This is so beautiful. Like, for example, Jane Street to OCaml. We entered the Haskell ecosystem. We made all these improvements, and we have people in the Haskell ecosystem saying, we don't want you here. You're using Haskell to reputation launder a Ponzi scheme. Oops. And they write articles about that. So it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. So it's like, wow,
I expected that from the Haskell community. I thought they were much more academic and much more serious,
I think it's the ivory tower syndrome of, we're so special and so amazing, and we don't need anybody. And the problem is that insulates the community, prevents it from coming along. And, the problem is all the other languages are evolving at a very rapid rate, like F#5 and Scala 3. Had they existed back in 2015, I would have never even considered Haskell, because they have most of the things that make Haskell great, but you have much larger development ecosystems, and you have all access to all the things that you'd want, like quick check and formal methods and these types of things. Like F# has F*, for example, and dependent object types in Scala 3 is a great foundation. So, it breaks my heart that we've endured these kinds of things and tacit in support, especially after investing millions of dollars in that ecosystem. But, we gained some benefits out of Haskell. Cardano is the best cryptocurrency in terms of architecture and engineering, and it just works, and it's just very reliable. And people actually work with the node, like stateful operators and other people. They have very little issues, all things considered. The only problem is it works with itself, and it does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't play nice with others. Like, it doesn't work so well with other languages and other code. It takes a lot of work to get it to work well with others. And so, again, it's hindsight, and you can only do what you can do with the knowledge that you have, and what you've learned. And by being in Haskell, we met a lot of great people like Manuel Chakravarty and Phil Wadler. And I actually do believe a language like Haskell is a perfect language for smart contracts because of the emphasis on semantical correctness and the consequences of failure with these types of things. So it's a mixed bag, and it's one of those things that you ponder as a CEO as you get older. You look at your legacy and you try to sort out, like, what was good and what's bad, what was really a mistake and what was an unanticipated accidental success, and try to not make the same mistakes again and again.
Yes. So these are the lessons that you've learned in about how to construct, the perfect blockchain. But what about you? I mean, if you look at yourself then and now, like we met 3 years ago, and there was Charles, and what about you? You know, like 3 years later, 3 years down the road, what have you learned on a personal level?
Well, I undervalued when I was younger my health, and I undervalued relationships. You know, I was a very mechanistic guy, and I said, well, everything will just work its way out. And you kind of just take people for granted, or you take situations for granted. And as I've gotten older and I've watched people come and go, people die, and also have had a few health issues along the way. Like I suffer from gout and other things. And, you know, that doesn't seem like a bad ailment, but God, when you can't sleep for an entire month after it gets into your ankle, you really
Yeah,
start
right.
thinking, man, I'm an old man. You know, I was walking with a cane there for a bit.
Yeah.
So I value that a lot more.
Mm.
And I value, you know, living in the present, the moment, and really enjoying people a lot more. The other thing is I've been under constant criticism, and all CEOs of companies that build cryptocurrencies. So Dan Larimer with, you know, EOS, and Vitalik with Ethereum, and Gavin with Polkadot. It doesn't really matter who you are. Is if you're in that position, you'll be under constant criticism, and not just for the decisions you make. You'll be under constant unfair criticism. Your personality will be attacked. Your weight will be attacked. Your physical appearance will be attacked. People just make stuff up, and then they'll develop perverse opinions of you. And some cases those will be justified only by a tweet, like the
Yeah.
MetaMask tweet, for example. It's like you're judged by your worst moment ever, and that becomes you, and that's always you, and there's no redemption or forgiveness or these things. And there's a lot of fake news. And so when you look at all of that in its totality, it creates a cynical exhaustion with people. You know, you just think, how can people be like this? How can people think this way? How can people be so bereft of empathy? And so the constant battle is to somehow stay optimistic and try to see the best in people and believe that everything is going to work its way out, and that people deserve more and deserve better, and not converge into a mindset that the world is the way it is because people are innately bad. So and so the optimism comes from the community. You know, that's what keeps me going. If I didn't have this community and work with you guys and gals, I couldn't do this job, because it's too hard otherwise. I see people in Africa getting clean drinking water to people. I see people building businesses. I see people spending weeks and weeks and weeks learning these protocols, reading our papers, and writing about it. And they genuinely believe in what we're doing and want what we're doing to be successful. And they're very optimistic themselves. So whenever I get brutally criticized, that counterbalance, it tends to reinforce. So that's something that I didn't anticipate. It's a happy accident that for the darkness, there's some form of light, and it does keep me going. And it's made me a bit more balanced and measured, and a lot more pensive and reflective and contemplative and quiet. I used to be a talkative know-it-all when I was a kid, and now I'm sometimes the quietest person in the room. And it's a very surreal thing.
That's
and
interesting how
you
things
don't
can change
notice
in
it.
that respect.
Yeah, you don't notice it until you see old friends who haven't seen you for a long time, and they say, "Wow, you've really changed." I said, "Well, you know, you can't go through an experience like this. It's like going to a war.
Yeah,
You know, you can't go to an experience like this and not have a dramatic interpersonal change."
exactly. Anyway, here we are, and Cardano is about to launch and go into a triumphant 2021. I mean, everybody's expecting this to be the year of Cardano. What is the product that you are, on a personal level, most looking forward to roll out?
Well, obviously, well, you know, I'd say there's two. You know, smart contracts. That's really the pinnacle of utility for cryptocurrencies. It's where you're saying, I'm giving you this magic system, and you can now program it and do things with it, and you can change everything with it. It's kind of like when the personal computer was invented. You know, it's like, okay, it used to be these mainframes, and only a special group of anointed people got to use them, and there's only a special set of things you can do, and you have to ask permission. And now you own it. You can do something with it. You don't have to ask permission, and you can go and build something. And it led to the rise of Microsoft, and later on the rise of Google and Facebook and Amazon. It's extraordinary to see what these things do. So I'm genuinely super excited to see what the community builds with smart contracts because there's so many great ideas and there's so many great people in the community, and it's not hard getting developers. It really isn't. Ethereum, I watched the Colorado Ethereum group grow from like 3 people to hosting conferences every year with 2,000 or 3,000 people and like a 5-day hackathon that covers 3 floors of a building. Well, it's like, well, that just like happened. Come on, it's organic growth. It's very easy to get lots of developers. The hard part is to build meaningful and interesting things. It's very easy to write lines of code. It's much harder to make those lines of code dance and sing and play and change the world. So this year's the challenge is not only introducing smart contracts and this new paradigm, but marrying that with a desire to solve real problems and seeing what the community can do. So this concept of commercially critical infrastructure. So getting us relevant in the DeFi space, getting the stable coins and the oracles and these things and dexes, that's going to be a lot of fun. And all the things that come after. The other side of it, and this is trailblazing, the governance components of what we're doing, with Voltaire and Catalyst. That's something Ethereum has recused itself on. And most cryptocurrencies, they have a tacit acknowledgement that it's necessary, but they don't take that bull by the horns. And the problem is that if you don't, you reach a maximal size. And if you go beyond that, you fragment, which is why we have Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV and Ethereum Classic and so forth. And you think to yourself, how do you manage growth and innovation when you have 1 billion people? If you have no governance layer, it's chaos. And your natural response is to do nothing, which is actually why Bitcoin doesn't evolve anymore. It's reached a point where they all kind of acknowledge and agree that there are things they should do. Change the crypto, change the address structure, get rid of a lot of legacy warts and problems and historical bugs. Go ahead and add smart contract support in a safe way, like Simplicity or something, but they can't get it done. Or when they do get it done,
on top of a patch.
Years and years and years to get done because they have no governance layer that allows them to do that. So we're proactively trying to solve that problem because then we have the best of both worlds. We can grow massive, but we can still be nimble and execute and adopt technology. And that, I think, is what's going to outcompete everybody in the long run. It might take 5 years or 10 years, but if you have a fundamentally more sustainable growth model, then you keep what you've gained and then you just keep going and you keep doubling. Facebook, for example, had that. They had just a much better growth model, a much more sustainable growth model, and ultimately better governance at the corporate level, which is why they were able to grow to 3 billion users, across the world. So that's what I most look forward to. I'd say, smart contracts are fun because it's like watching a movie. You don't know what people are going to do next and they're going to build next. And it's really exciting to see the innovation and beauty. And that's what makes Cardano the financial operating system, makes it useful. It's what allows you to run an economy on it. So great. But none of this matters if we can't get the governance right and the sustainability right. And we already have almost 5,000 people, I think, in idea scale. And hopefully, looking back at this recording by the end of the year or early next year, people will laugh at 5,000 and say, oh, yeah, well, we have 50,000 or 500,000 or something like that. So I hope that continues and we can converge to a stable governance structure this year. It's so big, I'm going to write a book about it, and we have a lot of great plans for it. And if we get it done right, it'll be the shining gem of Cardano and what Cardano is known for.
Anyway, so in the course of the last few years, maybe also previously in your private life, you've been to as many as 52 countries. It's like a little added bonus of doing this job, I guess. If you had to pick one, which one did you like best? And is there one country or city that you would wish that you would have visited and it sort of got away from you?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Japan. I lived in Osaka, and I just fell in love with this discipline in Japanese society and this pursuit of perfection in Japanese society. I mean, from everything from agriculture to food to just philosophy, it's so taking things to their logical extreme. And I always admire when anybody does that. And what's crazy is that there's so many conventions and unspoken truths there. And for example, they had this problem a long time ago where women were getting molested on the subway. And so what did they do? So it's a very Japanese way of thinking about solving the problem. So they said, oh, okay, we're going to create women-only cars for the subway. So that'll solve the whole problem. So they created these women-only cars and they paint them pink and they put them on the subway lines. But then they said, oh, well, we have these capacity issues where we're over capacity. So we're occasionally going to let men into the women only cars. I was like, okay. But I could not for the life of me figure out the rules behind that. They were so arbitrary, but yet everybody in Japan knew them. So I would like, oh, no, you can't go into that. That's the women's only car. No. It's okay. Men are allowed to be in this car today. Okay. So I go in there. So like the next week, the same day, the same time, I go into the car and I'm like, oh, this is the time where men can be in the women only car. And some Japanese guy's like comes in and is like, you can't be in this car. Get out. It's women's only car. But this is the man time, right? They're like, no, it's not. So but there's no signs or maybe there are, but I can't read Japanese. But everything that's society is like everybody knows what the rules are, but they never tell you what the rules are, and you're always left pondering like, how the hell did they figure out the rules? This is great, and there's some sort of nonverbal conveyance of all those things. So I profoundly enjoyed that. I really enjoyed South Africa as well. I mean, that's a crazy country. Yeah, you got lion tamers and Zulu tribesmen, but then you have big cities and you have the townships, and there's just so much there, and there's so many great people there, and there's such diversity in that country, and you really can get lost in all of it. And it's not exactly the safest of countries. And so that's part of the charm and the appeal. Is
rich in contradictions, I guess.
Yeah. So in terms of some places that I wanted to go that I didn't have a chance to go, I was actually going to go last year to Antarctica and go climb Mount Terror. But I didn't have a chance to do that because coronavirus kind of shut the whole world down. And so there's a lot of little stuff like that where there were places that I really wanted to spend more time, but I was always just on business and traveling, like Norway, for example, or I just outright couldn't go because the world got shut down, or something happened, or I missed a flight, or something like that. Romania is the same way. I missed a flight. I was supposed to go there, and we just couldn't get it done. And I said, all right, well, it is what it is. And ironically, that week I was supposed to go, I was going to hang out with John McAfee all week. And I was just thinking, man, in an alternate universe, what would that have been like to be in, Romania for 5 days with McAfee and, and a lot of other crazy Bitcoiners. Maybe it's better for Cardano that I didn't go.
Well, it would have been worth the story, I think. So, right. Last question: If we get to repeat this interview again in 1 year and then again in 5 years, where would you like to be with Cardano, with the project?
Well, we got to finish out our backlog. So all of Cardano 2020 has to get done. So smart contracts and the preliminary governance layer, and a lot of the refinements, the staking experience and the code bases, and then improve the interoperability of things, especially on the Adrestia side. And we have deep plans for that, and we'll spend tens of millions of dollars and however many months it takes to get all that done. Then there's the renewal of the contract. So this concept of Cardano 2025. So how do we take Cardano from a very competitive, great cryptocurrency to a financial operating system for 1 billion people? What will get us there? And there's an enormity to that. It's like building a government for Cardano. And I'd like to take it from 3 core entities to 30 or somewhere all around there. So there's a lot of building that we need to do. And this guy named Leon, we hired specifically for this task, and we've given him a great team, and I'm personally working with it. So my hope is by this time next year, that's all done, and Cardano 2025 is underway, and all those entities are cheerily chipping away. And we have a much more focused and surgical role in the ecosystem where we can very specialize. So we're moving faster and we're doing more, but in many ways we're doing less. And other people are picking up the slack and who are more specialized and better suited for that than for us. I'd like to see the governance stack evolve as well. I'd like to see Catalyst completely finished by the end of this year, and the Cardano Treasury to be fully activated. At its current rate, Cardano Treasury prints about $100 million a year available for the community. I'd like to see that deployed because that's a very powerful tool in the growth of Cardano and the evolution of Cardano. And it's super important that gets done. And I'd like to see all change in Cardano be done through the CIP process for hard forks and soft forks. And I like to see client diversity. I'd like to see the birth of not just a Haskell node, but also a Rust and a JavaScript one, so that we have multiple competing code bases and a much more implementation agnostic way of viewing architecture. So I would be happier than a kid at Willy Wonka's chocolate factory if we get all that done this year. It's going to be a crazy and wild year, but I think we will. And I think we have a very good shot, and we'll certainly keep hiring and see, keep pushing. And Emergo's pushing really hard, and the foundation's pushing really hard under Fred's leadership. So I think we have a very good shot for all of that to happen. And as a final point, I'd like to see real use and utility in the platform really reach its promise and potential, especially in Africa. We have all these deals we've been flirting with for years, and it's super frustrating. You make a lot of progress, and then a civil war breaks out. You make a deal, then the minister dies or gets fired or replaced. It's a patience you have to have and a dogged resilience you have to be successful in Africa. But ultimately, that's the most meaningful work. So I would like to, enter the interview next year. We should definitely pencil it in for January 4th next year. Do a retrospective, see if it happened.
Right.
I'd love to see millions or tens of millions of African users in the system doing real things on the system, because then I know that it's inevitable. We will grow to 1 billion, and it's going to change the world. It's just a matter of time. And I'm a very young, very patient guy. And so I have the time to spend to wait and realize and see the system on that direction.
Yeah, if you can get 1 million users, there's no reason why you can't get 1 billion. So
exactly. And we're almost at 1 million. We're hundreds of thousands right now, but a few million in Africa would be great. And I think we might actually be able to make an announcement soon about that. We've been negotiating something for 8 months now, and it's had some delays because of the civil war in Ethiopia and other problems. And it's a very frustrating deal, but I think we'll be able to get it over the fence here soon.
Well, thank you very much for using this podcast for doing the announcement of that. So that's always cool. I've come to the end of my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add or state, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly follow us on social media, my Twitter and the IOHK Twitter account. And also subscribe to us on YouTube. We try to release videos on a regular basis, and go to our website, iohk.io, for our blog. And there's a lot of cool stuff there. And every few weeks we release a blog post. And of course, the community as a whole has created a lot of great content. I'm really sad to see the Cardano effect go, but I'm glad to see that other podcasts are stepping up like yours to kind of fill that void. And so we have a very vibrant community, and on Reddit, on Telegram, and Twitter, and other places. And this is not a static community. It lives and dies by participation. It's dynamic. So if you're interested, don't be a passive onlooker. Get involved, learn about it, and pick up a shovel and do something interesting.
Exactly. I mean, if somebody like me can do it, then everybody else can do it. So especially those young guys out there. So get going. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and we wish Cardano all the best in 2021. And well, we hope to see you again soon when Cardano will have conquered at least part of the world. So thank you very much, Charles. And
thank you so much, Alfred. This was a lot of fun. Cheers.
Cheers.
To support the Cardano Hotel podcast, you can delegate to Cardano Stake Pools Hotel in Dubai. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel.
Things just get so crazy.